Afternoon, Bill.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone joining.
Hi, Bill.
Hello. Thanks for joining.
There we go.
Hey, Polly.
Good afternoon.
Still waiting on a few more to join. So, Michael, maybe we give it just a few more minutes before we kick it off.
All right. Welcome, everybody.
Good afternoon. We are, Michael, still waiting for some of our committee members. Randy
Absolutely.
from Craig, Sonia, I don't see here, Yampa or Oak Creek as well. So hopefully give it a couple more minutes, but hopefully we pick up some more attendees.
Agreed. All right, everybody, we're just waiting a little longer. Make sure some folks get on.
Maybe should we get going, Michael, and catch people up?
Yeah, we will go ahead and do that. I just texted Sonia just in case. I know that this was kind of some people are moving their schedules around. So I think we can get started. Well, everybody, welcome that's here. We'll get more people going as we build this thing in. We have a pretty full agenda for today. And what you're going to start seeing in the RTA formation committee meetings is a lot of information. So hopefully everyone kind of read through their packet. There's going to be some questions and some decisions that we're going to look for today and allowing us to help Kaplan, Kirsch, and Bill move forward with the RTA process. So at the beginning of this, we have the agenda. You can see it. If it's on your screen, you can adjust your screen how you want it. But we're going to start off with Bill kind of reviewing the schedule moving forward. And so, Bill, take it away with that. And then as we go through this, if you have questions, please raise your hand and I will call on you.
Sounds great. Thank you. I'm going to pull up the schedule real quick. I don't think we have to spend a lot of time on it today. But I just want to highlight just where we're at. There hasn't been a lot of changes to it, but we're here in at the end of January, and this box is in the wrong place. But basically, what we're working on right now is getting our notice to DOLA and the Department of Revenue. That's a big thing, a deadline that we're going to hit today on this meeting. Then we are in that work around the draft IGA. That's what we're going to be focusing on as well in this meeting. And then as we have a productive meeting today, we're probably going to transition at our next meeting to start talking about getting ready for our public hearings that we're going to have at your local government levels. We are also in the process of doing our outreach to CDOT. You'll hear an update from Polly on that. And later in the agenda, I'll update you on our technical committee getting ready to start work next week. So we are on time, we're on schedule, and that's just what I wanted to highlight here. Polly or Kirsten, do you have any other scheduling things you want to highlight before we get move along in the agenda?
I had just one quick note. We obviously do not have our next two formation committee meetings on this schedule. And you may have noticed in the packet, we put kind of a decision question matrix broken down by 3 meetings today and then 2 others before we start moving into public hearings. So Bill, just wanted to emphasize that we should try to get those meetings on the books because they'll really be essential for kind of wrapping up the last decisions we need for a sufficiently complete IGA to go to public hearing.
So do you think then, because it looks like, and I'll discuss it later in the meeting, but we can move it forward, the doodle poll that's out right now for the next formation committee meeting, it looks like Friday, February 14th is one of those time blocks on that day. Looks to be fairly convenient or workable for folks. So I'd say that at least we probably have a mid-month meeting coming together. Does that mean we need to slide these public hearings over a week or 2 weeks then?
I think it might be, my sense is that it's probably premature to do that. We'll just need to make sure that we, work through the questions we need to work through. We do have some give in the schedule, as I think you had covered in our first meeting. But it seems like we probably don't need to make that decision until our next meeting.
Okay. Except that we have to do public notice of those meetings. So we'll have to be ready to either move them or pull the trigger. But that's something we'll probably know as we work through stuff today.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll go through that, Bill. And just, I did notice I have a scheduling conflict on that Friday, the 14th. I went ahead and thought I was going to be here, but our city council is doing some interviews for the new city manager. So that Thursday and Friday are starting to get a little bit higher priority in that. So before we actually set a date, I may go in there and have to change that one last time. But go ahead and let's get started on the next item.
Yes, so Bill, I don't know if you're in a position to share this letter. I wanted to thank those who had sent a few comments. We had 2 comments come in, one which was a correction to a typographical error in the description of the boundaries. So thank you. That was Sonia. And then we made a clarification to be sure that, as you may have noticed when you reviewed this letter, it broadly identified all of the possible funding sources that could be used. And we revised the provision that says one or all of the following to say one or more than one or all of the following methods of financing. Just to be clear that we're leaving ourselves maximum flexibility to mix and match those requirements. And so I think the objective on this agenda item is just to see if there were any other comments or questions on this letter before we drop it in the mail this week.
Anyone got any comments on that? Yeah, I went through it. It seems we've been kind of going through this a couple of times, so we don't, it's just the quick notice. Nothing really in it is life-changing or committing us to anything down the road. It's just kind of putting that notice and starts the clock. So I went through it. I didn't see anything big changes, and I'm not seeing many hands up. You guys are all good with it, clearly. So
do we need any kind of a formal motion to approve? And who do I guess also the group would approve you, Michael, to sign it on behalf of the formation committee.
That's right.
yeah, we don't really have a chair, or I mean, I've been chairing this informally, and I'm sure we need to kind of get started, especially in the IGA does identify that through the different roles. But as far as the formation committee, I would entertain a motion to make me the chair and allow me to sign this.
I'll make that motion. This is Randy from the City of Craig.
Randy Looper, City of Craig, thank you. Do I have a second?
I think Randy might be the only other elected official on this call.
Is that right? Look at that.
Take a look.
Yeah, I'm looking now. I see a lot
Hey,
of other.
Brian is here. Can I second it?
Sure.
All right, Brian seconds the motion.
Swintech. All right. Okay. All those in favor of the formation committee of appointing me the chair to be able to sign for us, signify by saying aye. Actually, any opposed, raise your hand or signify. All right. Hearing none, motion pass.
Right. So we'll coordinate with you, Michael, to get this signed and out the door this week.
Absolutely. And is that something we can do electronically or phone,
Yeah.
fax, and whatever? Okay.
Yeah,
I'll
absolutely.
be going to cast here in a little bit today. All right. Well, let's keep going and talk about more of this letter and the submittals that we need. Let me get to my notes. So the DOLA letter and that, Polly, does that have to have the, and I guess the letter, the one that I was just reviewing didn't have the map on it, but you're going to add the map to the letter that we're going to throw in there, the boundary
Yes.
map, right?
Yes, and it should have had a boundary map on it.
I made out
when
of
it was
scaled back
circulated.
down.
Are you finding it?
Yeah, yeah.
It's there.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I know we saw that. Everyone's good on that. There's be a little conversation here in a little bit that we'll bring up about the US 40 right-of-way easement in that agreement that we'll talk about. But let's start with this IGA. And what I mean is that because Moffat County doesn't is not part of the member of the authority, but we still have to have access across that. So there's some legal issues that we were, hopefully you guys picked up on in your packet. But let's jump to number 3, Polly, about the IGA decision matrix. And by the way, thank you. That really helped me crystallize what was required of us.
Great. So I'm referring to the memorandum that went out with Bill's materials on Monday. And in that memorandum, we identified 3 subjects that seemed like the committee should probably will be kind of an easy starting point before we get into the hard questions of funding and specific services to be provided. And the first of those was exactly the question that Michael just raised, which is confirmation of our boundaries and the parties that are expecting to join. The statute calls it the combination, but are expected to sign the agreement. As it's currently drafted, we have the 6 signatories. We have Routt County, we have City of Steamboat Springs, City of Craig, Town of Hayden, Town of Yampa, Town of Oak Creek. The boundaries are identified as the boundaries of all of those jurisdictions. And then this flagpole connection along US 40. So the kind of rules for these decisions are laid out in this memo. You have to have at least 2 members to proceed. It's possible to include areas within municipalities or counties who are not parties to the IGA with the consent of the governing bodies. So essentially what that would mean is if someone opted not to participate, but still wanted to be receiving some services, it would mean that municipality or just wouldn't have a vote and wouldn't be a formal member of the RTA. Those are really the kind of critical questions for this group is who's in and who's out. Are we comfortable with the overall boundaries? And then third is the IGA, in order for the formation of the RTA to be effective, we have to go through an election next fall. And so what happens if 4 of the 6 members have an affirmative vote and someone doesn't? What are we going to consider the minimum number and members who have to receive electoral approval to move forward? And, when we drafted the IGA, we took a rough stab at this and said, if we've got Steamboat and Routt County, that should be sufficient to move forward. That's really just a straw proposal for discussion. So I think there's our first question for discussion as it's written now. It's written for with 6 participating members. It says that if Routt and City of Steamboat Springs get positive votes, it moves forward. Otherwise, the IGA never goes into effect. We can tweak that. And the boundaries include all of those jurisdictional boundaries plus the flagpole.
Can I just jump in real quick? Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Just for awareness to the group, in the Eagle Valley RTA, it was structured that Vail, Beaver Creek, Avon, and unincorporated Eagle County had to have an affirmative vote to join. If any one of those 4 had failed, the whole thing would have not happened.
Terminated.
So I think that's kind of what we're posing. The question is that a structure? Do you want a similar structure to that? So that's, and if so, what are those jurisdictions?
Yeah, thank you. I was going to ask that question for some examples. That was exactly the one I was looking for. Yeah, I think that at a minimum, and I'd be open up to all of you guys that are on, whether you're elected or not, if you guys are on the phone, but Routt County and Steamboat Springs, clearly the large ones need to be in this, because if Craig, for some reason, didn't vote it in, we can still get the RTA started and they could always join later. Hayden, the same thing, but I think we have to have at least 2. What are your thoughts, people on this call? And feel free to unmute, Randy.
Yeah. Basically, I agree. I mean, if for whatever reason Routt or particularly Steamboat don't vote it in, there's no point in Craig being involved because it's not going to happen. I mean, whereas with Craig, we could, I'm assuming we'll go in, but if we don't, you're right, we can join later. But without Route and Steamboat, it's not going to exist. The money's just not going to be there.
Yeah, I agree, guys. It's Sonia. I'm on the call. Sorry, I'm on the road, but I think that's right.
Thank you, Sonia. Yeah, anybody else want to jump in? Sarah, anyone? Tegan? You guys are all good? Go ahead, Sarah.
I'm just listening. I'm not really part of this group. So
No, I know.
Well, I'll jump back in, Michael, if you're looking for someone to fill the airtime.
No, we got a full
Because,
agenda. I just want to make sure everyone speaks. That's all.
Yeah, well, I just want to make sure that we're clear that, we basically have talked about the service territory might be bigger than the voting territory, meaning that this conversation has happened over time where we've kind of all agreed that, it might be a situation in which one of the jurisdictions doesn't vote it in, but they still receive service. And so, to me, I think we're still, unless the spirit of that has changed, I think this is a kind of a no-brainer question, and we would provide service to the territories even if they didn't vote it in initially, under the assumption that they would see the benefit and eventually choose to participate.
Totally agree. All right. Well, let's just keep that in, Polly, for just Steamboat and Route County, kind of in your common sense approach to this.
Okay, sounds good. And the other thing that we'll do is we'll just be sure. So again, to your point, Sonia, if a jurisdiction doesn't join, it still can have its territory included within the service area with the approval of the governing body. So I think what we may consider is just some language to the effect of, if someone doesn't join, they will be included with a vote of their governing body to be within the service area. We'll make that a clear option.
Yeah, no, thank you. And does that, Polly and Bill, has that happened often in these formations of RTAs where one, besides, I think Gibson wasn't part of that first one, but has everything else, has this happened very often where this is an issue?
RAFTA is a good example that Garfield County the towns of Parachute and Rifle and Silt are not part of the IGA or the RTA, but they are receiving service from RAFTA. But the trade-off is they have to do an annual appropriation to give their fair share of the funding for that service, but they don't get a vote on the board of directors of RAFTA. So they're funding at the appropriate level and without a vote. So
Gotcha.
that's the trade-off.
Bill, can I clarify that? So I'm confused. So if it failed in Craig, which means you're not getting any money from us, we could still be part of the area, but we're not going to get any more service than we currently have. Correct?
Well, I can't promise you what a future board would do, Randy, but that future board may say, if you get additional service from the RTA, Craig would still have to contribute something toward that service.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Then you have to appropriate it from your general fund.
Yeah, it's somehow the city would have to pay for it instead of the voters, whatever. The money would have to come somehow, or else it stays the way it is right now.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
very similar to what it is right now, where we get some funding from Craig for the regional bus that the SST is providing. And so imagine the RTA taking over that regional transportation and, increasing it to Craig's circulator route. But that would all be figured out how much it would cost and would come out of your general fund.
I hope you feel better soon. Exclamation point. I love
Oh,
you so
sorry.
much.
Yeah, that
Exclamation
makes
point.
sense.
Let's try and talk soon.
That's what I was thinking.
Jason.
There needed to be
Jason,
money of
please
some
mute.
type.
Yeah, and we have, as drafted right now, there's a clear provision that allows service to be provided to areas that elect to essentially pay their share, as Bill described it for service, even though they're not
I'm sorry, I've been
technically
so hard to get a hold of today.
within the, is that Jason? Jason?
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm gonna mute him. Give me a
Yeah,
second.
sorry.
So we have some of that flexibility built in as it's drafted now.
Okay.
And everybody, this is obviously not something that wants to be a selling point, right, to the voters. Meaning,
Oh, right.
you know, if you choose not to opt in, you still get services. Like, that's not something that we want necessarily bandied about in the campaign, obviously.
No, clearly it's a era. Again, you do that, but you lose any voice on the board. You have no seat on the board, you know what the costs are, stuff like that. So no, there's a lot of not a lot of benefit unless you're part of the membership, except you're getting some services. All right.
One more quick thing, Michael. Sorry, just to give
Yeah.
another example, in Eagle Valley, when a major service provision was a circulator bus that would go through the town of Eagle and then through the town of Gypsum, connecting the two towns and providing first last mile. When Gypsum elected not to join the RTA, for example, that circulator bus has gone away. That's not going to happen now. Well, at least until Gypsum finds a way into the RTA. So there is give and take and from those votes.
Cool. Okay. Polly, what's next?
So next up is the appointment of directors. This one should be a pretty simple, hopefully a simple decision. Again, we've laid out here the basic rules from the statute. An RTA must have at least 5 directors. All of the directors have to be elected officials, so there's no choice about that. And they have to be elected officials from the signatory or combination entities. And each member has to have at least one elected official as part of the board. So what we have done is, again, the straw man approach is, or straw woman approach, is to have each jurisdiction appoint actually 2 elected officials, one of whom is the primary director and the second who is the alternate that steps in if the primary is unavailable for some reason. The objective being to recognize that elected officials have busy schedules, and you just want to be sure that the board is set up to be able to move forward and take action with a minimum of difficulty with attendance. So that is the basic structure. So if or when the RTA is approved, the first action would be for the governing body of each of the participating entities to take formal action to appoint those directors. The other thing that is related to as drafted, is related to the circumstance where maybe you have, we don't get the full slate of membership approving, or someone withdraws in the future, because there do have to be the minimum of 5 directors. So if for some reason the membership numbers drop to 4, or we end up having only Route and Steamboat approve, then Route and a Steamboat would each appoint, I guess that would be 3 directors each, and to satisfy the minimum requirements for representation. Alternatives would be, differential representation among membership. I mean, that's certainly an option. You just have to have at least 1 member from each, or 1 director from each member entity. So that would be the main difference in how we might change from the base proposal we're starting with in the draft we circulated a few weeks ago.
Yeah, thank you. It seems pretty common sense to have that. My question would be, in your guys' experience, have you ever had 2 elected or 2 voting members or from one municipality?
So we haven't, although it was a discussion point.
I mean, it
Um,
may happen in the case, like you just said, with just Route and Steamboat Springs, we'd have to appoint additional ones. That was its own deal, but, specifically speaking of all 5 jurisdictions or 6, what the jurisdictions all winning, being part of the RTA, having a voting member, or at least a board of director, but would like Steamboat ever want, where would the benefit of having 2 when others only have 1? That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine a scenario where there was some disproportionate amount of funding provided by one member versus others that felt like they needed greater control or more votes. Again, I think where this certainly settled in Eagle Valley, and Bill, you may have some insight into, what some of the discussions behind the scenes were with the other RTAs. There was some conversation about that, and ultimately it seemed kind of a little undemocratic. And I think, it just felt much more comfortable to the formation committee to stick with equal representation among all the members.
Okay. Your experience? True.
Yeah, definitely in Eagle Valley, it came up as an issue. One of the larger tax-based communities definitely wanted to explore a proportional representation issue, but it was quickly felt that it was kind of undemocratic and it would set up, it just wouldn't feel right amongst the effort. And so fortunately they dropped it. They just said, you know what, it's not a hill we're going to die on this issue. So we didn't really have to tackle it all the way. I don't believe another RTA has a disproportionate system. I think it just in practice, it would create division where an RTA's kind of base premise goal is collaboration.
Yeah. All right, and that leads us really into the discussion of the voting requirements. Because, okay, so we have 1-on-1 of every board on the directorship, but when it comes to voting, let's talk a little bit about that. Go ahead and present that, Polly or Bill.
Yeah, so I can go ahead and run through what we've done here. So, this is sometimes you have very large boards. And, I think what we have proposed as a starting point is a few very discrete decisions that are essentially administrative decisions that can be made by a simple majority of a quorum present. So in this case, a quorum, if we had all 6 members, a quorum would be 4. A majority of 4 would be 3 that could vote and make decisions on very simple things like approving contracts that are already parts of budgets. I can read through the individual decisions just so that you have them, but the concept is there's a core group of decisions that are pretty non-controversial. They don't implicate large policy or budget decisions, and those can be approved with a simple majority of a quorum, so 3. And anything that doesn't fall into that category is a decision that has to be made by 2/3 of the membership or the board of directors. In this case, that would be 4. And assuming again that we have all 6 members vote to participate. And so we'd look at, that would mean you'd approve budgets that way. You would approve, decisions about the types of service you're going to provide. You'd approve decisions like, are we going to seek funding or new revenue sources that have to go to the ballot? All of those types of significant decisions would have to be made by at least 4 of the member jurisdictions voting together. There is one decision that requires more, and in this case, that decision was an amendment to the IGA. And the Eagle Valley Formation Committee decided that there was a lot of debate about that. That's a big decision. It changes the fundamental structure that's set up as part of the original approvals. And the decision was that if the RTA Board of Directors wanted to amend their IGA, they had to have a unanimous decision -1. And the principle behind the -1 was that they didn't want any single jurisdiction to be a holdout or essentially, have the capacity to extort concessions on from the other jurisdictions. So they figured that -1 was sufficient majority without giving any one jurisdiction outsized power over that decision. So that's the basic format. You could imagine making other decisions by a greater majority. You could imagine making all your decisions by a simple majority of a quorum. To me, this seemed like a good balance. It was the subject of a lot of discussion and where Eagle Valley settled.
Okay, thank you. Any clarifying questions anyone has? It makes sense to me.
Yeah, I'm all good with that.
Thank you, Sonia.
Yeah, it makes sense because you don't want one entity controlling it either way. So
yeah, I do like the -1 for the supermajority if needed. So that works out well. Okay. All right.
Okay.
Oh,
So-
just on that, hold on, Polly, on that note, I think one thing we had talked about, and I think we brought this up at council, Brian, if you recall, but was the voting is a 1-to-1 vote. It's like we're still talking about the board of directors, not necessarily having more than one board of directors from one jurisdiction, but consistently just saying it's a 1-to-1 vote. Is that changed? That's the same, correct? Polly?
Is that a question for me? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we still have that in there as a 1-to-1 vote. And I just want to know if anybody on the line
Yes.
felt differently, because I don't want to blow over that just so quickly.
no, I think 1-to-1 vote makes great sense.
Okay. Yeah, it's democratic, right?
One clarification.
Not so much democratic also because of the representation question, but I think it's the right way to go.
Well, I think the question came up a little bit is in the funding, right? If City of Steamboat does a 1/2-cent sales tax and we're generating $3 to $5 million a year, and we still only get one vote, I mean, that's the crux of the discussion, right? And so I don't have a problem with it because, again, it's more dealing with the municipalities providing service to our citizens, not necessarily who's paying the most for some of this. But I would love to have any open conversation if someone feels otherwise, but right now that's kind of how I've seen it.
Yeah, I think that's right, Michael. And I mean, in past discussions where this has come from and gone is, yes, the city's going to put in the most money functionally based on the commercial activity, but at the same time, the city is the attractant of the job. So it makes sense that the city would put in the most money and everybody would vote based on best interests of the whole.
Good. Okay. Polly, sorry, I just wanted to go through that quick clarity real quick because it was something that brought up before.
Okay. And then I think just to confirm, is the group comfortable with the concept of alternate directors? I personally strongly recommend it for the reasons I mentioned, but
yes,
it does mean you'll have
Yes.
two people that kind of have to stay up to speed.
Yeah, I think that should be, I mean, as an elected official, we all have colleagues and there should be an alternate in this one for sure.
Okay. So we're making great progress. The only other question that we have scheduled for this meeting is to just confirm the officers of the authority appointment and duties. And again, this is, we have started from, the proposal that was circulated it contemplates a chairman, a vice chair, a secretary, a treasurer, and an executive director. The executive director being the likely outside, in other words, non-director officer. You would expect that's somebody who's probably you'll do a solicitation and a hiring process. All of the chair and the vice chair at a minimum would have to be directors. At Sonia, your comment was that you thought it would make sense for the treasurer also to be a director and not be an outside party. And I did go ahead tentatively and make that revision. I would say that about the officers that you want to have be directors, the treasurer makes sense as well. The secretary could be an employee. It could be, an advisory member, or that could be established by bylaws where you find that officer. All of them would be appointed to their roles by vote of the board itself, so nomination and board. The offices of chair and secretary can't be held by the same person, but it does allow that other roles be held by the same person. So you could have a secretary treasurer, you could have a vice chair secretary. The chairman has signatory authority, leads meetings, executes and delivers contracts, deeds, and instruments, and has kind of appropriate and customary roles of a chairman. The vice chair steps in when the chair is unavailable. The secretary is responsible for keeping minutes, noticing meetings, maintaining records and files, and that would be, sort of the annual DOLA reports and so on. And of course, what you see in practice is that role is performed by staff with the oversight of your appointed secretary. And then you have a treasurer. The treasurer is responsible for overseeing the custody of funds, stocks, bonds, and securities, coordinating filing of tax returns, receiving monies, and has also some signatory authority. All of these kind of are the basic roles and of the officers. You would be making, the board would adopt bylaws, would adopt resolutions specifically delegating authority and establishing all of the details and signatory authorities that are necessary for bank accounts and that sort of thing as part of their day-to-day and process of standing up the authority once it's approved. But these are the basic kind of oversight and responsibilities of the officers. The executive director is the chief executive officer that oversees policies and directives of the board and implements board requirements. Officers can resign, and they can be replaced by the governing bodies. It contemplates that terms would last and be the same as the term of the elected official on the governing body of the municipality or county. And if there were this was a question you raised, Sonia, would there be attendance requirements? Would there be some minimum performance requirements that the board could adopt? Yes. And the IGA contemplates that those requirements would be established by the bylaws adopted by the board after the formation. I guess the only other notes I would make is that if there are vacancies, they're filled in the same way as the original office is filled. So by the governing bodies of your municipality or county. And this IGA contemplates that board members would serve without compensation.
And I would assume the executive director is the hired. That's probably of that
Yes.
list. That's the only one that's paid.
Correct.
Okay.
So again, there's nothing unusual. This was not a heavily negotiated provision in the Eagle Valley process. So I don't have any particular recommendations here, except I appreciated your comment, Sonia, and would recommend going ahead and making the treasurer also an elected official.
Cool.
Thank you. This stuff seems pretty straightforward, and I apologize everyone for being late. I didn't realize I was going to be out of service at this time, but I am back. So I don't want to take us off this topic, but I don't know where you guys started. And I do want to circle back on a couple of assumptions that we're making as far as Routt County's participation. But as far as this decision goes, I think this is great. And I appreciate you adding the board as the treasurer being a member of the board.
Yeah, and then I think when we talked a little bit about the with boards and the membership on that, the city of Steamboat Springs, we have board assignments in December. We do an annual board retreat with the council, and that's when we do change who's appointed to different boards. And so it would be, if there was any change during our season, it may not be the same person for that tenure. It would try to be someone that would help balance, especially with elected and term limits. We want to make sure the right people are there. And it does, I did, my first caution, Sonia brought up about the treasury, is that I don't think the responsibilities are that detailed from a treasury standpoint, but if we had 5 people on the board of directors and not one of them had any accounting experience, would that be wise to have them as a treasurer?
Well, you know, this, just to give you some context, Michael, of how this comes up in my mind is just, you know, I think it's kind of a basic best practice to have oversight at the board level. And so, you know, oversight does not equate to accounting necessarily. My vision would be that you have a CEO or, you know, executive director, whatever we call that individual, who then also has, whether it's an outsourced accounting function or an individual within that organization, depending on the size and scope, who does the day-to-day. But, you know, I'm pretty committed to the basic best practice of having an oversight named individual who is an elected official, just to make sure that the board is consistently looking at the finances and that there is one individual who's responsible for bringing those to the table. I understand your point, you know, that person may or may not have the technical expertise to analyze whether or not things are above board, but I think having the board treasurer just kind of flags for the team that somebody will be bringing this to the board. There's accountability on a regular basis and that sort of thing.
Totally agree. And that's why I just brought up what went through my head, but I think that is a fine way to move forward.
Right. And I agree, Sunday, because I've been on numerous boards and I've always ended up being treasurer because the board doesn't have any idea and doesn't care. And I do.
Right. And just having a treasurer on the board level doesn't absolve the rest of the board from the responsibility of being fiscally accountable for the decisions that are made. But at the same time, it just kind of keeps that placeholder to make sure that somebody is accountable for the actions.
Totally agree. Okay. Polly, does that give you what you need from us so far?
That gives me what I need. And I think what I'm envisioning as our process, it will be, I'll make a few tweaks that we'll share with a comparison so you can see what provisions have been revised in response to our conversations. And if there's anything obviously that catches your eye as part of that kind of additional review, I will be sure that, I think, Bill, we want to put just a catch-all for, you know, any last thoughts based on the prior conversation. So it's not the last bite at the apple if there's something else that catches your eye, but we'll circulate, you know, any tweaks and revisions after this meeting.
Great.
All right. Next on the agenda was meeting number 2.
Michael, before we go to that, could I just flag one point that is important?
Yeah.
Thank you. Again, I don't know where you guys started, but just so you know, being the new representative for Routt County, I mean, I personally am very committed to this process and have been throughout my career, regardless of which local government I've been serving. We do have a new county commissioner, and so we haven't had a chance to talk about the RTA and the commitment to the RTA. I suspect that it will still be there in its full entirety. So, I'm not concerned about that. But I will say I do have a concern, which is, Routt County throwing our support behind this is not necessarily, from my perspective, and again, we haven't had a group conversation, it's not necessarily unconditional support, meaning that, we're committed to seeing certain projects advance that may or may not be more visionary or, expensive than some others in this group. And so, we've been pretty clear from the moment one when the conversation in the past has turned to, oh, we're just going to simply expand the bus service, that's not really what we want. So I have a bit of a concern that the formation committee and the technical committee are different, and that I just don't want to see the technical committee go walking down a road that we can't support. So I guess my question to the group is, how do we make sure that the top line priorities that we all feel are important are included in the technical committee's process and discussion? And how do we make sure that, once we commit to these detail-oriented pieces of how we structure a board, that in fact, we're all advancing the same project that we can stand behind at the ballot?
To me, one of the most efficient ways to approach that, I mean, as much as I wouldn't want to be at every meeting, but we do need to give the technical committee some guidance and some direction. But if we want that accountability, then we need to have some of us that are on the formation committee show up to some of those or be part of those committees, even if in the background. Because if what I'm hearing from you, Sonia, if the technical committee is going down some rabbit trail that we haven't even discussed or gone through, I would sure love for someone to hold their hand up and say, oh, wait, before you guys go down that road, as opposed to them spending hours working that path and then coming back and the formation committee is like, where'd that come from? So, I hope that it's okay for anybody that's on this call to also participate in the technical committee. And it would be encouraged to at least listen or be part of that just for that accountability, Sonia. I don't want to stifle their creative, what they need, as the technical committee is going to be coming up with solutions. But we definitely need to make sure that we have some guardrails, and those guardrails are going to be determined by really us on this call.
I would just add that presumably this process is going to hinge, like most processes that involve kind of heavy or at least some level of technical staff input, that everyone is sending their representatives to the technical committee with good guardrails to represent the elected body's objectives and focus for this process. So I think there's hopefully no one is going to be sending representatives to the technical committee who don't have a pretty clear idea of what can be supported at the elected level.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, right. I think those are all good points, and I appreciate it. Just by virtue of the name of technical committee, indicates that they're talking about the technical aspects. And one of the pieces of the puzzle that is hugely important about success at the ballot is the slate of projects. And so, I'm concerned that, on the technical committee, can we get them guidance to make sure that as they are considering projects, they also consider saleability, not just cost, not just, these practical technical aspects, but like there may be things at the ballot that are going to be highly saleable that might not be, and saleable meaning, people will get behind them, that may or may not be the most technically important. So that's my concern, is just, we're are we all on the same page about our level of understanding of what the voters need to be successful in saying yes?
Can I jump in, Michael?
Please do.
Sonia?
Yes, please do.
So yeah, maybe the word technical is too technical, first of all. Maybe it should be planning or recommend, but the goal of that committee was so that you, as elected officials who have a lot of time things pulling at you, aren't going through things like costs, all those kind of nitty gritty transportation planning pieces. We wanted to be able to work on those, talk through those. I'll jump ahead. We are meeting as a technical committee on Monday. Every jurisdiction is represented. It said they can be there and available to be at that meeting. Our goal at that meeting is to kind of recap where we have been and where we need to go, and the kind of information we need to put together to share with you, the formation committee members, because it is your ultimate decision making. We are just trying to put together some recommendations for you all to consider as far as the service goals. And they can be as specific, a bus route, to aspirational, some kind of long range planning thing, and everything in between. But we just wanted to save you all time to not have to be part of, all the kind of the transportation planning pieces. So, but I would agree that I would welcome input from anybody and everybody. And if you want, and I would like the guidance of the formation committee members now. Do you want me to include you on those invites? I was just trying to spare you all another email and another thing on your calendars, but I'm here to facilitate what you all want. So, but Sonia, I hear you loud and clear. And our goal is not to tell you what we think you should do. It's to provide information and recommendations to help inform your decision making.
Randy?
I think, I mean, at least from my point of view, yeah, I want to know when they are, and I want to be able to listen just to back up to make sure I agree with Sonia to what they're doing and what they're figuring out is what we want. So yeah, I mean, whether I can make all the meetings or not, I still want to know about them, and I want the ability to be part of them if I want to.
All right.
Yeah, and I guess where I'm at is like, I think it's just important that regardless of what this, I mean, I appreciate the point, Polly, that like basically, I mean, we need to be communicating with our reps, right? They need to know that bottom line routes out if we don't have X, Y, and Z. Like that is clear and basic. But at the same time, I mean, I think they need to be parting from the basis of we've already established some priorities. Like we have gone through a transportation planning process. We have 5 priorities as a county with all of our municipalities behind us. And, I don't know about Craig, but through the TPR program, we have 5 priorities. And Moffett County is in with us on 2 of those. So like, are those included? And then also we went through the Fair and Peers report. We got some really good information about what our people are interested in. So are we considering those things, or are we starting from zero? So, I don't need to be in on all the meetings. I just feel like, we've already basically agreed to certain transportation issues that we were trying to solve through different processes. And I don't want that information to be lost and to have them kind of starting over again from zero.
I think a good way to do that, Sonia, would maybe to make sure, Bill, that the technical committee again has that report and also references that as the latest kind of communication. And then if we can use that as like, if someone said, well, let's do something different that's in the report, we could sit there and reference it and say, okay, do we want to go that direction? I know I had talked a little bit, Bill, about getting Jason to help with some of the funding. I know that as we start to get into March, we're going to really want to look at how much it's going to cost for the operations and maintenance on the annual basis, with a reserve for some capital projects. And so as rough draft was your report, Jason, as we're moving forward into this, I want to revisit that so that we can have those informations. And a lot of that may, Bill, like you say, will come out of this technical committee for sure. But we're going to use that document as a guidance. And so I would just offer to Jason, is there anything more that you've discovered since that report was put out in March of 24 that we want to make sure that the technical committee is involved in? And just kind of a revision if that's needed, because I know that we're starting to need more detail of what's the routes and the circulators and how much those cost and that kind of stuff. So when we start to get into more detail, we're going to need our March and April to start building that case so that when we really go public in the summer, we have our ducks in a row.
Yep.
Yeah, and on that point, the framework is all there to do that relatively efficiently and quickly. In that we can, take all of the concepts and projects that we had and dial them up, dial them down, and refine them to get to some pretty accurate numbers there. But they're well informed as a basis for now. They're maybe trailing a bit when it comes to inflation and things like that. But yeah, that's inherent in the process going forward. So.
And one thing just to keep in, I mean, it's early, it's January, we have a lot of time to work on it, guys. But Jason, as we're looking for in some of your assumptions that you have in the report was that we would have a lot of grants and state funding and other things in there, especially on the capital part, getting started. So I don't want to just assume that. I want to dig a little deeper with the technical committee on how real some of those assumptions are. When we talk about our portion's 10% and it's a 90-10 match or 10-90 match, is that realistic, and what funding is that really talking about? So I don't want to do any of that now, but that's going to be what we need coming into March and the spring and the summer.
Great.
Okay. With that, let's talk about the technical committee and Bill, what you were bringing up in your meeting number 2 ideas.
Yeah, Polly, you want to jump back in here?
Yeah,
Polly,
I'll jump back in. So as I mentioned, this memo was really just intended to kind of lay out the essential questions we need to confirm for the IGA mandatory provisions. And the meat of exactly what Michael and Sonia and we've been talking about is really laid out for the next meeting. And our thought was the technical committee will be meeting between now and our next meeting, developing some good information, obviously with Jason's guidance and Bill's guidance, and should be able to bring some questions and proposals for these 2 particular topics. One is a proposed list of projects and systems and proposed sources of revenue that we'll want to kind of start our public process with. So those are what are laid out for our next meeting. It looks like that meeting's probably going to be, did I hear, Bill, the 14th?
No, maybe later.
Maybe a little later. Okay. So I provided this list so that everybody can kind of be thinking ahead to what we're trying to at least get a rough idea of, enough to take to our first public hearings. Oh, I think you're muted, Michael.
Polly, I think you were saying, Bill, that there's you have the first technical committees on Monday. So again, looking for a framework that we can approve and look at that next meeting. So I really appreciate the cadence of these meetings is working very well.
So I have a question about what we've proposed and what's being discussed. And, I sent to Bill some questions and comments on the IGA. And I know that we kind of heavily borrowed from Eagle County's IGA, but has this group discussed some of these massive elements like air service, like whether the RTA takes over SSST in its entirety? And there was one other piece that, like, since I last checked in, was was not part of the discussion and got reintroduced. So I guess I'm wondering, have
I
we
think
had
you,
a chat
I think
about
you
that?
mentioned trails in
Yeah,
particular
trails,
in
that's
your
right.
comments. And I'll take a first cut at that, and then Bill and Michael and others chime in. The answer is, Sonia, we didn't make any attempt to try to tailor that list to, what was in the Fair and Peers report, except in the most general of ways. So we erred on the side of including more rather than less. And I think, there's nothing magical about including those things. They reflect no input from this committee.
They were placeholders.
They were placeholders.
Okay, I understand that. I guess my question is, to make sure that the technical committee has appropriate guidance, should this committee say, yes, no to some of those elements? Because I think having them included in there, opens the discussion around them. And I personally thought we had closed the door on air service and the inclusion of that in the RTA. I also thought that Steamboat Springs had made it clear that the RTA was not going to be like the local transit provider. And then the question of trails gives me a whole lot of pause. So, I personally am not comfortable with any of those elements, but I'm persuadable on this SST if that is desirable for this effort. The other two, I would really be hesitant about.
Well, and let's have more of a conversation on those. Let's just not kick those to the street just yet. I think part of this RTA and some of the funding that the governor has put on was to create a multimodal system. And so that's where I think some of these trails do come in discussion to try to create that down the road. As far as, and that to me is kind of paramount. SST, I was looking at section 8 again, and article 8.2.02, and there are some concerns. I mean, it's just a draft, right? I mean, Dan and Jonathan, we're going to look at that in detail. I think the intent of what right now, I have not heard otherwise, but I can be, again, technical committee and staff down the road. But the SST is what we're looking at getting disbanding or giving to the RTA is the regional bus, right? There hasn't been any conversation
We've all
about
been
the
clear on
city
that
limits
all along, right?
Yeah, it's not the city limits, it's the regional bus. And so that is definitely part of the conversation, and working through that. And I equated that very simply through kind of the relationship that Glenwood Springs has with its transit and the RAFTA, right? So there's two different entities and it's not one big conglomerate. And so I anticipate keeping that the same at this point. But there were some questions when I was going through the IGA last night again, that I'm just looking forward to seeing how we've got some time to kind of peel through this and make it work. So I want to keep it in the conversation. But again, I think the technical committee, to the start of your conversation, what we get back from their meeting on Monday would allow us to talk about the framework that we can move forward with and giving them instructions. So I don't think they're going to go down a rabbit trail on Monday. We still got to help us ask those questions that we need to think about, and then let's give them what we want the technical committee to, the proposed list for the projects and the systems.
So Michael, I guess I'm a little confused because just to be very blunt, like I'm a hard no on air service being included. I think
qualify what you're talking about air service. Are you talking about funding the air service like we do the lodging?
Yeah, I'm talking about minimum revenue guarantee programs should not be included in the RTA, in my opinion. And, the reason for that obviously is having been involved with the MRG for the past 14 years and having seen studies and failures at the ballot and having had discussions over time with the LMD and everything else. Like that's a loser. It's a political
and
loser.
I agree with you. I don't know. I mean, is it in the, I apologize if I missed that in the IGA, but
I did go ahead and delete that from the current draft.
Okay.
But so are we telling the technical committee, like we have decided that is a loser?
Yeah, I thought we had already,
Decided
I
that.
kind of thought I had heard that loud and clear at our last meeting. And that is not on our agenda or our discussion guide for the technical committee.
Okay, and are we also then telling them that the Steamboat Springs Transit is not part of what the RTA is going to be, or is that a discussion point? Because I mean, I'm fine with it either way. That piece doesn't concern me nearly as much as some of the other elements.
Well, you know, Jonathan Flint, unmute for a little bit, have a little conversation. Give me some insight to your opinion on this.
I think that when you're trying to move something within a regional basis, a specific town is probably not something, unless it's equal across multiple towns. For example, if there was a circulator in Steamboat, a circulator in Craig, a circulator in Hayden, whatever it happened to be, I think you're just going to have a hard time getting voter approval for that. Looking at what RAFTA does, you know, there's 3 different examples there. One being Aspen is completely served by RAFTA, but the city of Aspen pays for that service. You have Glenwood, which is kind of a 50-50, where the city has or goes out and gets the grants. They have the equipment, but they pay RAFTA to do the operations. And then you have Snowmass, which they run their own system in concert with what RAFTA does, but they're independent of RAFTA. So I would suggest that just focusing on regional service is probably the most appetizing for voters. And that's my half percent.
I would agree.
Sorry, Andy.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I
sorry.
don't disagree, but I have a question with that, because I can tell you right now, if we don't do a circulator, whether it's SST or the RTA running it in Craig, it's going to lose big time.
No, but I think the IGA has in there that the circulator, that there's an avenue for this RTA to provide the circulator route for the city of Craig, commensurate. You know, you got the whole global RTA, which is being funded, but then we're going to do a little extra. You're going to have to pay a little extra. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah, and just, you know, within our original study, the existence of SST as a separate entity running all the local service within Steamboat was assumed, and we did discuss that pretty extensively, that, you know, having SST become the RTA wasn't the right path. And then, as you know, Michael, correct on the fact that the Craig circulator would be a RTA project, not only for the benefit of Craig, but because of the inner relationship between a circulator running around Craig feeding into that regional route that then can be more efficient, because the way that the SST route operates today is it's trying to do both, you know, double duty, in that it's trying to do a circulator around Craig. So if you can, you know, have that, they work together. So there's good justification.
Right. And
no, Randy, that will be in there. Thank you for making that clarity on that. Anything else?
Well, the last element was the trails. And, you know, maybe it's just because I lived through the trauma of writing a portion of the Trails Alliance proposal, getting it passed at the ballot, having the voters be tremendously disappointed that it wasn't what they asked for, and then living the wrath of the Mad Rabbit question as a Route County commissioner. Maybe I'm a little traumatized, but that being said,
I mean, let's be honest. What specifically that you think would be a hindrance?
I think that, and this is, you know, again, our entire Route County Commissioner Board has not vetted this question, but from where I sit, I think our community has done a really amazing job of co-opting trails and weaponizing trails. And I am concerned that including something related to trails in this RTA could go in the very wrong direction. And so I have no interest in including it. And, you know, again, if it was just a placeholder from Eagle, that's great. If it's a discussion that I haven't been a part of because Commissioner Corrigan's been representing the county, I'd love to hear more, but I think it's a very tough, operationally, it's something that could derail other efforts.
Well, and I think what you're implying, or maybe you're implying, I may not put things in your mouth, but if you had a trails clause in there and people wanted to do a core trail all the way to Craig. And then that would take funding away from what we need. And you're looking at some multimodal trail that we really don't need right now. Is that kind of your worry in that? Because we've already been handling trails successfully. We don't need to add that to this RTA is what you're saying.
Well, sort of. I mean, I'm 100% supportive of the core trail from Stagecourt to Dinosaur. Like I'm all in on that. I think it's wonderful. But I think that what we have seen is if we open the door to trails, you know, we tried to open the door to trails with parameters and sidebars and everything else through the voters' approval of the Trails Alliance package, and it didn't work. So, you know, I just think opening up trails as some kind of question and like specifically looking at that language from Eagle County, I mean, that's enough to make me just say like, this has the capacity to go the wrong direction for the voters. And so it's less about like trails in and of themselves, because I recognize there's multimodal and there's safe crossings and there is all the connectivity and everything else. And I'm supportive of all of those things. My concern is just that, you know, we are going to make promises through this RTA, and I don't want to make promises that will not be kept because our community rises up and decides that they want to take what they want rather than what we have sold them through the ballot. If that makes sense.
And just so you guys all know, she's making a very good point about Steamboat Springs and our recreation for our communities. We have addressed these and solved these and see how it could derail an initiative like this. So I think that let's not leave it, let us not put it on the table, but I think with Jonathan here and Bill, when you hear us talking about how trails is a hot topic that we want to, you know, put some serious limitations for the technical committee to kind of address, let's just see exactly what that could be. So if we mention trails, let's be very specific on what, you know, maybe it's a trail to get from the Hayden bus stop to the park and ride. You know, that's about the trail that we're talking about.
First last mile.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. If that's okay, Sonia, I think we can address a couple of things. Thank you. I hear what you're saying, and I totally appreciate it. Sonia and I have been together for 4 or 5 years now, longer than that. But I think it's definitely, we're hearing that kind of work through there. All right. In honor of time and keeping going, what else we want to go through, Bill?
Holly, do you want to go through any more of this, or should we move on?
The only thing I'll say is just, you know, we'll be referring back to this for our topics at the next couple of meetings. And meeting 3 is a little bit more of a catch-all. So I just invite you to keep in mind as we get nearer to that meeting to maybe refresh and see if there are any issues you're seeing with our, as I said, sort of our base proposal that we need to tweak.
Okay.
All right. A lot of going through that with Polly. I appreciate it. Kirsten, was there anything that we hadn't really talked about that supports the resolutions or ordinances that we need to discuss?
Yes, so this is not proposed as an action item, but just to let you know that factored into the budget is support for each of you who end up participating in the RTA, that we will be available to draft the resolutions and any of the instruments, materials that you will take to your boards, councils, as the case may be. I do want to not revisit the schedule and use as a hypothetical what we have on there, as we're aiming right now, first reading or first public hearing early March and second public hearing late March. Those dates may push out, I understand that, but you will want to think about preparing the agendas and what you might need from us. We will assume that we will prepare the proposed approval document, which will be a resolution along with the draft IGA, and you may want support for your memos to your boards, slide decks and things like that, and also meeting support. If that is something that you want, please just let Bill know and he will circle back with us and we'll make sure we're available. And then for communities that don't meet as frequently or regularly as, say, for example, Steamboat or Route. We will want to make sure that the governing body is meeting and that they have a quorum. Again, it may not end up being March that these hearings go through, but we want to start planning for that. So anything we can do to help with that, we are available, and please have your staff people reach out to Bill. We will coordinate on that.
Yeah, and this is a good, oh, go ahead, Sonia.
Oh, thanks. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about that because I do have some questions about the timing and the strategy. Team Route was a little surprised to hear that, I was looking at your Excel matrix of the timeline, and Team Route was a little surprised to hear that we were putting it on the agendas in March. And I know we have some statutory timeframes. So I guess I'm kind of wondering, is that statutorily necessary, or have we assembled the public information packet that would sort of indicate that that's the appropriate time to trigger this level of public information on this topic? Like, where are these deadlines coming from?
So these are driven by a statutory, some statutory timelines in the RTA statute. And in particular, they're driven by timelines that are available for neighboring jurisdictions and CDOT to comment and to negotiate changes to our IGA. And we have to have an approved IGA before we can kick off those processes. And in practical effect, the way it has come down, we're probably not going to get much input from neighboring jurisdictions, probably except Moffat County and possibly CDOT. However, the way it comes down, we approve, kind of the basic concepts of the IGA. The resolutions we've used or would recommend are resolutions that give, the representatives on the formation committee some discretion to make minor changes or non-substantive changes to the document and flesh certain things out. And then we will have to go back. And what we did, in fact, was ratify those changes and approve ballot measures in August. So, and in between that initial approval and the August approvals, there was a lot of action. There were actually revisions that came out of the initial public hearing process. There were actually not changes that came from CDOT or neighboring jurisdictions in Eagle County. But again, right. That may be, you may get some feedback. But Bill rolled out the public relations process, and there were some tweaks to make it, proposals more appealing to voters. There was the negotiation of a whole plan for the transfer of eco-transit over to the RTA in Eagle County. There may be some of that goes on to peel out portions of the, the regional portions of the SST. Our goal isn't to have something fully baked. Our goal is to have something that is, ready to put in the oven and go through that public process in March.
And that's really what happens in those first two hearings that are required by statute. There's a time limitation and we have to have that. The content of those meetings, though, Bill, you kind of mentioned something earlier.
I want to make sure you're okay. You're good with the rye.
SBJ phone, you're not muted.
Sarah.
Sarah, is that Sarah? And so, Bill, when we're talking about that train of thought, sorry, that the simplicity of what those hearings are, it's just to kind of and kind of talk on that, would you?
Yeah, the way we did it in Eagle County is we surely did not go to the dais and read the IGA. The IGA draft was forwarded to each jurisdiction to be put into council or board packets. And then I or Tanya, who was eco-transit director, she and I split them up. We came to those council or board meetings. We did a simple PowerPoint on, hey, what's this RTA process? Why are we doing it? What are the benefits? Where are we at in the process? And then what is an IGA and what are the major elements of the IGA? And then we took questions from the council members or the board members, and then they opened it up for public comment. And then we brought any feedback back to our team to make edits. To tell you the truth, all but maybe the town of Vale, there was no feedback and there were no public comments. So even though we noticed it, ran newspaper ads, did everything. Yeah, that's how that worked out. It was about 30 minutes on the agenda each time. The only jurisdiction where there was more conversation was the town of Vale.
The one thing I would also just add to that is the approval must occur by the participating entities before the official sending of the document to CDOT. And so that sets in motion the latter timeframes. And yeah, so we can't push it out too far. We might have to go back and look at our docs, but that's the official trigger for the CDOT and the neighboring jurisdiction.
Yeah, it's the long lead item, and it's a little awkward in terms of overall timing, we recognize, but it's not the last bite at the apple. It's not, and it, as Bill said, it probably survived in Eagle County in 90% of the form it was presented in.
Well, that's very helpful context. I mean, I guess my thinking obviously goes to strategy and when is the big splash time, and what are we telling our constituents as we put these items on our agenda? How much time do we want to give them? That sort of thing. I mean, from where I sit, listening to what you have said, I mean, I would think that the Routt County commissioners would hear this as practically a consent agenda item and not require a whole great deal of information, because we know we're just continuing to move the ball forward, and there will be some tweaks and an opportunity to, revise once the project list and, so on and so forth. So yeah, I just wanted to understand if this was a big splash moment or just a matter of routine statutory checkbox moment, which sounds like the latter.
I think it's routine, but you do have to have, you do have to have a public comment. So a consent agenda is not something I would put on.
So the PowerPoint that we did was kind of to satisfy, you got to give some information for the public comment, even though no one made public comment. So I can get that presentation down to 10 minutes.
Copy. That sounds great. We'll hear it on a Tuesday. We'll keep moving forward in March. No reason to slow down.
I do believe, probably correct me if I'm wrong, but in Eagle Valley, we were doing that in late April and early May.
Yeah.
But we had already back channeled so much with CDOT that we knew they weren't going to delay our IGA. And that is our next agenda item because that process has started as well. So CDOT might say, look, we'll get your IGA reviewed and approved as quick as Eagle Valley. Then we got a little bit more time. And so maybe
that might be a good
segue
actually to start talking a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Now be a
Thank
good
you,
time.
Sonia, for those questions. Go ahead, Polly.
Yeah. So as we've said, the long lead time items are these items for neighboring jurisdictions and CDOT to comment and potentially negotiate changes with us. This is not a program, even in its broader sense, that looks like it's going to have a lot of impact on your neighbors, with a possible exception of the extension over to Craig. So what we have already done is started the outreach to all of the neighboring jurisdictions, the Eagle Valley, Core Transit, because they have a border that abuts the proposed boundaries of our RTA. We've divided and conquered based on who among your supporting staff here or supporting consultants had good contacts with those neighboring jurisdictions. Here at Kaplan Kirsch, we've already made outreach and identified the right individuals at CDOT to begin reviewing the IGA when we're ready. And we're expecting to provide an advance copy, to be sure that we're back channeling and identifying issues before we're actually providing the fully approved version. So we've already identified that, kind of teed that up with the right people at CDOT. We'll probably schedule a meeting with them next week just for a preview of schedule and likely inclusions. And then we'll follow up once we've nailed down in more detail what this funding and service plan is likely to look like. I also have done outreach to Eagle County. Eagle County has almost no interest in us. There's, again, not going to be much impact on Eagle County. They're anticipating taking that IGA to a consent agenda with a 10-minute presentation from their city manager. They're just waiting to hear what they need to say about it. I've done some preliminary outreach, but haven't spoken to Tanya Allen at Port Transit. But again, I'm not expecting any particular interest, just given the boundaries and the scope of what we're planning to do. Bill has additional outreach he's done, so I'll turn it back to you, Bill.
Sure, and I know we're running out of time. The most important outreach is Jeff Comstock and I are working to coordinate a meeting with him, me, Commissioner Villard, and Polly's team, so that we can talk about this flagpole and other items. I think that's kind of neighboring jurisdiction-wise the most important one. It's underway. Hopefully we'll get that on the books next week or as early the week after, because I think that's the most important one. So that's moving forward.
Just a quick question on that, Bill. Are they aware that we're going to submit the proposed boundaries, including that flagpole, subject to their approval?
Yes, I talked to Jeff about it.
Okay, great.
And question on Polly and Bill. On the January 31st letter to CDOT, does that start the time clock for these public hearings? Is there some, no? Just
Nope.
have
No, it's supposed to be done not less than 45 days before the IGA is approved. And this is a drafting element that's a little ambiguous about what approved means in this context. So we've just interpreted it very conservatively and are applying it, sending it in very early. It's just a notice. It has to be done, but it's really just heads up. This is coming down this will be a subject to election in the fall if we're successful.
Is anybody talking to the governor's office or OEDIT or any of the CTE folks? Okay,
Me
great.
too.
Okay, good. Because yeah, we want to continue to, I'm talking to them also, and I think we just need to continue to make sure that they understand we're moving forward in a positive way and that we want to tap into any and all funding that's available from recent legislation.
Yeah, the 230 bill is really what's going to give us the money the quickest for our RTA. And that's really set up. That's the oil and gas tax. And that's what Governor talked to me about one of our meetings. But also I mentioned it to Brandon on OEDIT about that. So we definitely are working that way because for me in the technical committee, I want to make sure that we look at those funding mechanisms, which are ongoing operation and maintenance, which were different than other RTAs in the past. So we have some mechanisms that we can tap into right away, and they're really encouraged to help us out.
Michael, let's talk offline about this because I listened to the CTE meeting yesterday and they're defining the parameters of how SB 24-230 is going to be allocated. And I think that the city and the county should weigh in to make sure that we're front and center.
Thank you. Let's catch up.
Yep.
Okay.
And I'm also working with OEDIT or coordinating with them as well.
Yeah.
Great.
Bill, what else did you want to go over when this?
We've already done the technical committee. I don't think we need to go back into that. We're meeting Monday. We heard loud and clear some great direction from you all. So we'll be working on that. Next meeting date, Michael, you have to touch up your availability, but I think we're looking at sometime in the week of February 17th. So you'll hear from me soon, everyone.
Yeah, and I will make some adjustments accordingly, but I know that 13th and 14th was just thrown on us to be able to have, we're looking for a new city manager.
Yeah.
And so we want to be able to keep that time slot right now for us, that we're already the candidates around that time. And it's Valentine's Day. So, right, no, I'm kidding. Yeah, but the following day, we're good. So we have city council Tuesday night, but we send that. I'll just update my part of the doodle poll, and then let's try to hook something up here, by Monday of next week.
Agreed.
Okay.
That's all I have.
All right. Any last parting thoughts from anybody, or concerns or questions?
Thanks, folks. It seems like we're making good progress.
We've got a good team, Sonia. I gotta tell you, I really enjoy working with you all, and I really appreciate you all being here. Yeah, start doing outreach right now. Start telling people that it's real. We're going to try to work on it, and we'll see what happens. I've been just to kind of testimonials when I go to the bar or go over to a PT. I talk to the person at the front desk, the receptionist, and I tell them that I'm working on the RTA, and they're all excited about it. And I said, well, would you support a half-cent sales tax? Oh, yes, yes. So I haven't heard anything negative from the working class people, right? So I just throw out a half-cent, trying to wonder what that would generate. But I'm just trying to stir the conversation early enough, and so see where people are. So, man, I think we're way ahead. We're not way ahead of schedule, but I think we're on schedule. I'm really excited for you guys, and I really thank you for your time today.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks, everybody.
All right, meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Yep.